Okay, so today we are gonna be comparing an M4 Bradley to a Gryphonne 4 pattern Chimera. I'm using Gryphonne instead of the last variant simply because Imperial Armor Volume 1 shows Gryphonne as a standard model instead of the last one, which is sort of implied to be a command and anti-armor vehicle. The last pattern also doesn't have a cross-section drawing, so all around it's way easier for me to take the Gryphonne for this scenario, plus in all honesty it doesn't really change the final outcome all that much. Now, the way that this video shall be structured is that first I shall compare both of them in 8 different categories, those being speed, firepower, armor, crew survivability, dismount capacity, awareness and sensors, reliability and maintenance, supply needs, and finally the price. After doing all of that, I will tell you why just looking at the stats doesn't really present you with the whole picture and why both Bradley and the Chimera are the way that they are. So without further ado, let's just get into it. First, let's look at the speed. Bradley can move at 60 km per hour on road and 40 km per hour off road, whilst the Chimera on the other hand can move 70 km per hour on road and 55 km per hour off road. Nothing more really needs to be said, Chimera wins this category. Next comes the firepower. First, let's cover the Bradley. It uses a 25mm Bushmaster cannon with an effective firing range of 3 km and a max firing range of 6 km. It can penetrate a maximum of 100 to 140 mm of armor whilst using APFS DST rounds. It also carries 7 TOW missiles, 2 out and 5 in. TOW 2A can frontally penetrate about 900 mm of armor, but TOW 2B can penetrate 127 mm of rooftop armor whilst using top attack mode. Now let's cover the Chimera. The Gryphonne 4 carries twin-winged bolters as its main armament. So what is the range of this thing? Well, in the books such as the Fallen Angel or the Eternal Crusader, Astartes who carry bolters are shown to be able to hit targets even up to 2.5 kilometers away, and the caliber of the Astartes bolters is only 0.75 inches, whilst for the heavy bolters it's a full inch. That being said, Astartes do often fire smart bullets, which are almost never given to the Imperial Guard. Plus, their ammunition is always built with more premium materials, which should give the bolters a comparable or greater range to that of the heavy ones used by the IG. So I would guess that the effective range of the Astarte bolters and the heavy ones should be on par with one another, aka 2.5 kilometers, whilst their max range is probably some 5 kilometers. Which all kinda makes sense, since bolters fire literal slugs which are way less aerodynamic than discarding sable rounds of the Bradley. Also, since the Bushmaster and the heavy bolters are basically the same caliber, with the Bushmaster having better velocity, longer barrel and more advanced ammunition, whilst the bolter most likely has gunpowder that's 2 or 3 times as powerful as our IRL ones, I would say that they are roughly on par when it comes to penetration of their main armaments. The only difference being that the Bradley would have a massively better rate of fire due to Bushmaster being belt fed, whilst the bolters in the Chimera most likely still use detachable box magazines. That being said, this would be somewhat mitigated by the fact that the Chimera has a third bolter in its hull, so at least in frontal engagements the disparity shouldn't be that large. Now, when it comes to the missiles, even though Chimeras don't get outfitted with those as a factory standard, I'll still be counting them in this scenario because they are a fairly common field modification. So, the Chimeran Hunter Killer missile has a built-in AI, or the machine spirit for the EDMAC Puritans, which allows it to be fire and forget weapon, being able to independently assess the situation and find the best route to the target. It can frontally penetrate the Lehman Russ, which at its thickest point has 200mm of plasteel or 400mm of regular steel. If either the missile or the crew assess that the penetration isn't gonna be enough to neutralize the target, it can activate top-down attack mode, just like the TOW 2B. The only issue with the missile is the fact that the Chimera can only carry 1, whilst the Bradley can carry 2 on the outside and 5 stored inside the vehicle. And the last thing going against the Chimera are its bow-mounted lasguns that seemingly defy logic. The crew compartment machine guns were an outdated concept even in the 60s and 70s. A good example being when the Soviet Union introduced its BMP-1. It had rifle loopholes meant to allow the dismounts to fire from relative safety of the inside of the vehicle, but eventually even the Soviets realized that this was a crap idea and scrapped it in the later variants. Let's discuss why and especially why the Chimeran ones are extra awful. First, the area inside of the APC is already cramped enough as it is. Introducing a periscope and a las rifle triggers would make it even less spacious. Plus, it would make emergency exiting of the vehicle that much more dangerous. Imagine the vehicle is on fire, and as you try to bail out, the guy in front of you hits his head on the periscope and falls back on you. Not only do you have to get that guy off of you, you also have to somehow save him and get him outside. Another is that these bow mounts and triggers would be incredibly irritating, since they would get in the way of the head cushions, making rest and sleep quite difficult. Also, in order to fire these things, you would have to be in a crouching position opposite of your seat, looking at the roof mounted periscope. So basically, since they are not being seated and you are not using seatbelts, any slight bumps might send your head flying at the ceiling, basically making concussions inevitable. I also find the accuracy and usefulness of these things to be highly questionable. How accurate of a fire can soldiers that are moving in a bumpy vehicle at like 50 km per hour and only seeing the outside world from a narrow periscope really achieve? Plus, they would also just get in the way of each other by bumping shoulders due to just how compact they all are. The bow las guns could also get damaged by the opening of the rooftop escape hatch, or the escape hatch could also get stuck on a las gun and make the escape from the top more challenging. Okay, I could go on, but you get the point. All in all, I'd say that it's a draw, with the Chimera having a razor thin edge. Next up is armor. Chimera has 150mm of plasteel on the turret, 150 for its superstructure, and 100 for its hull. And with my belief that plasteel is about 2 times more powerful than conventional steel, that would mean that the Chimera has an armor value of 200 to 300mm of conventional steel. It does also have an option to equip IRA, but I have literally never encountered that in the war, so I can only assume that it's incredibly rare. If you do know any books where the IRA pops up, post them in the comments down below. Regardless, even if I include IRA in this scenario, I don't have any stats for it, so I would just have to speculate on its capabilities. Including it would also make this armor category even more of a seal clubbing match than it already is. Speaking of which, let's now cover the Bradley. Frontally, it can protect from 30mm rounds, aka frontal armor is just about 110mm thick. Sides on the other hand are way less protected, being only about 30mm thick. Since, you know, Bradley is a real world vehicle, so it has to operate with cost, engine and space limitations in mind. Whilst the Chimera on the other hand is a fictional design, so it just doesn't have to. Unlike the Chimera, Bradley does come equipped with ERA as a standard, but that is more so to serve the role against heat threats like RPGs, rather than to protect against conventional ammunition. And if you're wondering why I'm not comparing their protection against heat threats, it's simple. I have absolutely no clue how protective plasteel is against such threats, since GW never cared enough to provide those stats. So all in all, Chimera wins this category, and by a pretty large margin. Next up, we have the crew survivability. Let's start off with the Chimera. First, the ammo storage is heavily exposed and placed directly below the commander, with no armor plating shielding it. So if Chimera ever gets penetrated, the ammo is gonna get ignited and start a cook-off, injuring or killing the crew in the process. The highly flammable fuel tank is also placed directly next to the ammunition, further worsening the situation. Next, the firewall that's supposed to protect the dismounts from all of this doesn't even extend all the way to the roof, meaning that at the very least, some of the shrapnel and the toxic fumes would reach them and possibly even inflict casualties. I have some more nitpicks, but they are not that big as to require mentioning. All in all, the Chimera's best protection is its armor. If that thing ever gets penetrated, it becomes somewhat of a guard cooker. Now let's cover the Bradley. It has Kevlar liner to reduce shrapnel if the vehicle gets penetrated. Next, it has external fuel tanks, whereby the fuel is stored outside of the main crew compartment to prevent cook-offs and killing of the occupants if the hull is ever breached. After that, it has an automatic fire suppression, which uses high-speed sensors that can detect a flash and extinguish a fire in milliseconds, preventing the ammunition from detonating. It also carries less infantrymen than the Chimera, so it's a bit quicker to get out of. All in all, Bradley wins pretty easily. Next up are the number of dismounts. For Bradley, it's 6 to 7, and for the Chimera, it's 10 to 12. So obviously, due to the funny number, Bradley wins. Nah, just kidding, it's more complicated than that. Having a bigger number of troops isn't necessarily always always better, since if the vehicle hits a landmine and gets destroyed, it means that you have just lost half the squad instead of the full one. But having the entire squad in one vehicle also has its benefits, like better command and control, which is especially important in guard formations that may not always be equipped with voxies. It's also easier on the manufacturing side to create one long vehicle than two shorter ones. So all in all, I'd say that it's a draw. Next up, we have the situational awareness and sensors. First, let's talk about the Chimera. Commander has two periscopes on the turret and no vision box on the hatch, whilst the driver only has one vision slit in front of him that only allows him to look directly forward. It also appears that the Chimera doesn't feature any cameras since they are not mentioned in the equipment list. The Auspex are also missing from that list, but if you want to be generous, you could maybe argue that the Commander's systems control panel includes those. Although I would disagree with that since it's way too small to be Auspex and looks more so like a strange rangefinder and missile guidance system. It could also be for turret reverse. Regardless, the Auspex of that size would most likely only be useful at ranges of like 500 to 600 meters, if even that. And for anyone wondering, Auspex are similar systems to radar that can detect hostile targets. I'll also be kind to Chimera and say that it has some sort of night vision and thermals, even though it's not mentioned anywhere. Quite on the opposite, in war Chimeras often use and carry searchlights for target acquisition. But let's disregard that fact and say that those searchlights are only there to help out the infantry. I'll also again take an assumption and say that the driver's control panel and console also have built-in GPS, a dead reckoning device, a speed dial, a fuel gauge, and so on. Even though again this is not mentioned anywhere, it would be kinda silly if the Chimera didn't have them. Anyways, let's now discuss the Bradley. First, it has an IBAS, aka Improved Bradley Acquisition Subsystem, which includes 2nd Gen 4 forward-looking infrared, which is a high-resolution thermal camera. It allows the gunner to see through smoke, dust, and total darkness, and it can detect target's heat signature from miles away. Next, it has a day TV camera, aka high-definition color camera for clear identification in daylight. Then it also has a dual targeting tracker, aka the computer that can lock on and track two different targets simultaneously, making it much easier to hit moving vehicles whilst the Bradley is also moving. And finally, IBAS also includes a laser rangefinder. Next up, Bradley also comes equipped with the CIV, Commander's Independent Viewer, which allows hunter-killer capacity, aka the commander can use the CIV to scan for the next target. All the whilst the gunner is still busy shooting the first one. Once the commander finds a new enemy, he presses a button to almost instantly hand off the turret to the new target. And look, I could go on and cover DVA and FBCB2, but I don't think that there's any point. Bradley wins and by a pretty wide margin. Next up, we have the reliability and maintenance. Chimera is said to be the most reliable and easy to fix vehicle in the whole of Imperium. For the Mechanicus, that is. I mean, just look at the track skirt. If the track ever gets damaged, you would have to remove like 500 rivets, alongside 15 plates, each weighing like 60 kilograms. Which for the Mechanicus ain't a big deal because they have power cranes bolted onto their backs. But in the real world, that would mean that you would have to have a lot of free time and several power tools to just replace broken pieces of track. But you know, it's not all bad, since most of the hull is riveted together. It's probably much easier to get to the engine and the transmission than it is on the modern designs. When it comes to Bradley, its reliability has mostly improved with each variant, but due to multiplications of systems on board, maintenance time has only increased. So all in all, I'd say that it's a draw, with the Chimera having a slight edge due to its better mechanical reliability. Next up, we have the supply needs. Bradley has an operational range of about 400 kilometers with a fuel consumption of about 1.5 liters of fuel per kilometer. Chimera on the other hand doesn't have these stats, so we'll just have to speculate a bit. We know that the Chimera has a weaker engine than the Lehman Russ, but it's also 20 tons lighter, so I think it shouldn't be that much of a stretch to say that its operational range and fuel efficiency should be somewhat comparable to that of the Russ, which has a 250 km operational range on-road and 100 km operational range off-road. But its fuel efficiency can be up to 0.3 liters of fuel per kilometer if you use high-grade Imperial fuel, that is. So, since Bradley has an extended range, whilst the Chimera has a more efficient engine/fuel source, I'd say that this category is again a draw, with Chimera again being in a slight lead since its fuel efficiency is massively superior to that of the Bradleys, whilst the operational range isn't that different. And now we finally get to the price. In one of my previous videos that you should definitely go check out if you're interested, I calculated that the Leman Russ should cost some 100k for the Imperium to produce, and considering that the Chimera requires a bit less resources but a bit more manufacturing time, I would say that it should cost roughly the same. Bradley on the other hand costs some 6 million, meaning that for the price of one Bradley you could have about 60 Chimeras. Now of course this is heavily misleading. Imperium operates on war economies of scale while simultaneously having the resources of half the galaxy, whilst the USA just doesn't. But even with that said, the Chimera should still be cheaper since plasteel is way easier to work with, and also since Chimera's design is mostly riveted together, which should cut the manufacturing time a bit. It also doesn't come equipped with a lot of high-tech sensors, so that should also lower the price. All in all, Chimera wins this category, meaning that the final score is 4.5 to 2 in favor of the Chimera. And now let me tell you why all of this numbers scored doesn't really matter on the modern battlefield, and why both Chimera and Bradley are the way that they are. Let me ask you a question. What is the biggest threat to APCs in the 21st century? Well, it's drones and RPGs. It doesn't matter how good your armor is, drone can simply hit you on the sides, rear, or even on the turret roof. You can somewhat mitigate this by giving the vehicle more and more armor, but then you are willingly slowing your vehicle down and increasing the cost of manufacturing. Not to even mention the reduced operational range and higher fuel usage. Remember the square cube law, twice the height, quadruple the mass. So how do you deal with this? Well, you give them drone jammers and hard kill systems. Hard kill systems being shotguns of sorts that can detect incoming projectiles and shoot them down before they hit their target. If this fails, you have your ERA, which gives you 1 extra life and buys you enough time to bail out of your predicament. Notice how I never mentioned tanks or anti-tank guns in this scenario. Well, that is because Bradley is supposed to operate in maneuvers where the routes of advance would have already been scouted by drones and air power. If a tank gets spotted, it's not the Bradley's main job to go deal with it. That is the task of the artillery and air power. Bradley is only supposed to use its missiles as a last resort. Now compare this to Chimera, whose main opponents like Chaos Codes, most Xenos and Traitor PDF don't really use drones. If you're interested, I made a video on the topic as to why the Imperial Guard doesn't use them, so check it out if you're interested. Chimera's main threats are mostly tanks, artillery and RPGs. It's the reason why it has such a good mobility. It's there to help it minimize exposure to pre-sighted artillery zones. That's also the reason why its armor rivals that of the Russ. It helps to protect it from artillery shrapnel and even against some very long-range tank rounds. And if the enemy possesses a large quantity of RPGs, then they will just get issued ERA to give them an extra resilience and help them close the distance. And now putting unprotected ammo next to the fuel tank starts to make a bit more sense. If the vehicle ever gets hit with a weapon powerful enough to break through the armor, it doesn't matter that the fuel and ammo are gonna start a cook-off, since everyone inside is most likely already dead. Next, when examining survivability, you have to look at the strategic picture. The US military operates on the mentality that a vehicle is way easier to replace than its crew. Since, you can create a new vehicle in about 2 weeks, but it takes 18 years to create a new soldier. And with the global decline of the birth rate, it's kinda dubious if even that one soldier is really all that replaceable. Imperium, on the other hand, defies logic and has near infinite manpower. Apparently, women of the 41st millennium that give birth in the disgusting squalors of hive cities don't seem to suffer from puny things like infections. Again, I have a video on the topic, but audio is kinda crap, so I'll probably be updating it at some point in the future. So with all that in mind, it starts to make a lot more sense as to why Imperium shoves an entire squad into one vehicle instead of creating 2. It's because manpower is not an issue, and due to very common Vox shortages, it just makes sense to have the squad together rather than apart. Also, having Kevlar liner to protect the crew from shrapnel would only increase the cost per unit while still not doing anything, as explained in the previous statement. If anything is large or fast enough to breach the Chimera, Kevlar liner ain't doing shit. And although bull-mounted lasguns are kinda useless in actual combat, they could prove useful in garrison duties. If the Chimera ain't moving all that fast and has a decently flat road in front of it, then an extra pair of eyes using weapons from a protected position could never hurt. Also, I guess it could could maybe be useful in urban warfare, that is if the lasguns can go full vertical mode and the periscope can also be adjusted to point upwards. Which is all making a lot of assumptions, so I'm leaving it as a possibility, but know that that's just that, a possibility. I have absolutely no war examples. But one example that I do have is that the bow-mounted lasguns are often employed to disperse rioters whilst blasting CBDHS on a loudspeaker. Yes, it's true, it was revealed to me in a dream. So in conclusion, is the Gryphonne 4 Chimera a good design? No, not at all, it actually sucks for any modern day operation. Its weakness against drones alone would render it only useful in secondary and support operations. Is Bradley a good design for the Imperium? No, it's not. Its anti-drone and RPG hardkill systems would be of dubious usefulness once attacking heavily entrenched enemies with almost unlimited manpower reserves and artillery support. Its small dismount capacity would also result in squad and platoon level command and control issues. Not to mention the fact that you would need twice as many APCs to transport the same amount of dismounts, which would increase the amount of fuel you would need per combat operation, plus you would need double the maintenance time since there would of course be twice as many vehicles. You would also have a bit less storage on the transport ship, but that goes without saying. All in all, for the Imperium of Man, which defies manpower logic, the Chimera really is a good design. But in the real world, where manpower might be an issue, it's really not. The vehicle is effective for the type of war the Imperium prefers to wage, aka war of attrition. Whilst Bradley on the other hand is a lot more useful against modern day threats like drones, RPGs and even simple lack of manpower. As such, it's more useful for decisive maneuver warfare operations meant to end the conflict very quickly. Okay, that would be it from me. If you liked this video, remember to smash the like and subscribe buttons, leave a comment if you agree or even disagree. Until the next time, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.